well, in this context, which started with coming to work with Marc Pelon, who I've known for a few decades now, and actually I invited myself to come to work with them. I've been there many times where I made a laboratory, not a workshop, but also workshops, but a laboratory to share my tools and approach with them. But it always was, I was in charge. And this time I asked them, I really wanted to be able to work with them and whoever, if their long-term group, to see if the tools of my working process, how it would go in the opposite direction, what they would want to play with from my toolbox. And then immediately, and I actually said, no, they asked if I wanted to also give a workshop at L'Animal, and I said, no, I don't want to do a workshop this time there. I just, and then we had the corpography, well, when they contacted you to talk about collaborating to bring me here, the opportunity for the corpography laboratory showing was one of the possibilities, and a workshop, which I thought was kind of, for me, a mini workshop. Maybe I would not really do a laboratory so much as I don't know. I've never done this, so, but in my mind I thought, oh, maybe it would be more oriented towards questions. I would respond to questions from the Barcelona community of dance artists, and in response I could offer practices, but not kind of design it as a workshop, because for me it's very short to do a workshop in 5 days with just a few hours a day. I'm not very practiced at that. I use the workshop laboratories really to introduce material, but then really I don't think of myself as a teacher, although one could, but I don't think of myself as a teacher so much as I explore through certain tools, and I know they're useful to other people. I have discovered they're useful to other artists. So I do almost have a kind of a, and I hate this word, but I have a kind of pedagogy. I can roll out a sensible course from the body into the acts of imagination. All these words have changed over time, but what I would just complete this, so with your invitation to do the lab, the Spora after, often I would do a lab or a workshop before doing showings of anything, because then you have some informed audience, and that helps people look at work if they have some experience. But so this was inverted, and so I would be working with people who might come to look at the work or not, but kind of fresh. And as it happened, it was great for me to mix up the order of things. And the people who arrived to come to the workshop lab, were so varied. I mean, I don't know I, I only the fourth day remembered to ask people their names. I mean, to share who we were with each other by name. And I asked if people knew one another. I kind of assumed they did, if they were part of a community in a, well, I guess Barcelona is a big city, and there are a lot of networks of dancers here. That's not a surprise, but it's still a smaller city than some. But they said they didn't. Most of them didn't know each other. And this was the fourth day, so I was curious how it appeared that they were very generous with each other. Just to say, people who came were incredibly generous and open to each other because we're working together. And yeah, really sharing in inner processes, and they were very beautifully open to that here. And I see by the end, of course, which is so short, but by the end there was a lot of dialogue amongst them. They made a lot of, they met each other. For me, that's a goal. I mean, that's one of my hopes, is yet to be able to make dialogue amongst this crazy Western capitalist system of dance production that exists in all cities, with, you know, the liminal artists and the produced artists and all in between, struggling to work, find ways of working. Very classic, all the levels of hierarchy involved, and inevitable protectionism that comes in the art world and in the dance world, which is so small and so not rich. There's a small pot to compete for, and even smaller audiences. So it's a pretty interesting field to be navigating over time and visiting other cultures and seeing how each of us solves the same stupid problems in terms of support for the arts and for dance in particular. Anyway, you wind up with people who really want to be there. Yeah, it's through the tools are really about dialogue, feedback, recycling of ideas. It's the work really is about our perceptions that are on so many levels within the body, within how we have a dialogue with the environment outside, the society of people, of objects, of architecture, animals, and looking at patterns. And so sharing our strategies also in the context of our survival mechanisms as animals, human animals, but also shared with all living creatures, our particular needs, what we need to know in order to get from here to there. Mixed with all our cultural patterns that help us survive society, but also repress a lot of our imagination within whatever media we have found to express our visions. And I think of it as like how to regain or the practices are in a way, how to evolve back to when the world was a magical place, when we're very small children, and even up to 4 or 5 years old, how magical the world is, how meaning comes through interaction with our own bodies, too. Interaction with our own bodies and with everything that we perceive outside of us. So that sounds so general, but it's a specific focus of looking at movement. Everything is movement, but the movement of attention, the movement of organizing meaning out of the environment, and then transmission, which is how we, a performance is like, if it doesn't say, I want to show you something, that's why I'm here. I want to show you something, or I want to tell you something. Or, yeah, will you look at this for a minute and see if there's something that resonates with you, or if it's that, or if it's just an exhibition of skill or an affirmation of culture. There's so many reasons why we, or how we perceive performance, which is so peculiar in dance. But those questions we look at very directly through action. And this sharing, everybody's an expert. I mean, we're all an expert in surviving so far. Even if we think we haven't survived well, it's still a miracle we're alive. And on that level, you can start to trust yourself, your opinions, how you've managed. And that's really a place to start working from, is that sense of self-empowerment, that actually there are things that you believe you know. What you stand on, is not the floor, because you stand on your experience of the floor too, but that's what we stand on, is our experience and our illusion of continuity. And my stepfather was a philosopher of radical constructivism. It was kind of very close to Buddhist thinking, but we had lots of conversations about. His name was Ernst von Glasersfeld, just to put a name to it. And we had a lot of conversations about the construction of reality, quote. And one thing I really enjoyed, because I'm destroying his theory. I can't tell you his philosophy well. He'll forgive me, he's now passed away. That there's nothing out there at all. And that's, okay, take that as an idea, and that we construct it. His idea about constructing it was very specific, and it really was about interaction only. That nothing is out there has any sense until you interact. And for me, that's about movement. The interaction is about movement, even if it's just the movement of my attention to you. But so I said, well, what about gravity? I was disturbed about the physical world, what we call the physical world. I don't have to construct this stability of this floor every time I get up to walk. Yeah, I said, so how can it not be there? This is my misinterpretation of his theory, of course, but he said, Yeah, that the floor is there, that gravity exists. It's a consensus reality. We learn it from our culture, and that's it. It's a consensus reality. So we learn all of these realities from our culture, from our families. Well, anyway, I don't really believe that. But I like to chew on it because I also feel like there is not only nothing out there, but everything is out there. So a space is never empty. There's no such thing as an empty space. This is important to dancers because our instrument is space, space and time. So it is important to be able to attend to a space, and instead of just wanting to put something in it and make something move, that we wait and listen to the space. And even if we don't know what we're imagining when we enter the space, we can follow something rather than make something up or put something there. And then the process I really have organized is about editing, real-time editing. So if the space is full, as an editor of many things, video and writing, etc., how do I make something visible and how do I make something sensible? That's what I do all day long, actually. But for a dancer, there's really, it's just crazy. You just have a body. It's so complex, incredibly complex. And then how do you organize something to show to other people? And so this process of making something that you perceive visible is an editing process. You have to remove enough. You have to create a filter for your attention, and stuff happens. Yes, available.
Rates,
Yes. Oh, I mean, we each offer our filter, and we try to extract something that's a filter for what we want to propose to study. And and then there are many different frames that are offered by spaces and invitations. Actually, maybe one of the containers is, it's about learning. It's about a learning process, really. And what was lacking in my education, in all levels, in regular school, of course, and just regular school, but also in my dance training, is the empowerment that's possible to teach yourself, how you teach yourself what's being offered to learn. So transmission was kind of a major starting point for me, because when I started teaching to have a job, I really didn't have any material. I didn't have anything to teach, even though I'd taken years and years and years of ballet and gram technique, and I knew nothing. And I knew I didn't know nothing. So when I had to start teaching, I was lucky that I could. I tried to teach teaching. No, I tried to teach learning because I had no material. So it really started for me about transmission and creating a kind of learning exchange of like anybody teaching and anybody, because I realized that you don't really learn it. Well, you learn a lot when you try to teach something that we all know, because you somehow have to organize what you want to offer in a coherent way. So this started rather early for me to create. I didn't call them games then, but kind of scores for transmitting movement, people transmitting movement to one another. And I was also quite fascinated with language learning, which I have not, over all these years, I've never managed to speak another language, but I've been obsessed with the techniques that are used for teaching language. And so from all of these techniques I read about teaching language, I could translate a score, because all these different language techniques enter through different parts of the body, I could say. Some through color, some through emotional affect. I mean, there are many wild learning language techniques. So that was a source for me to translate a lot of these language learning techniques into interactions in movement with dancers. And what evolved was a kind of a general system. Everything we practice really is a learning model. How we teach ourselves. Of course, we're implicated. I have to teach myself what you're teaching me. I mean, I always have to do that after. I mean, you can teach me something, but I have to do all the work to teach it to myself. And okay. So there's a learning model involved in all of the tools of the score. It's all creating systems of feedback, of instant feedback, and not through language. I mean, articulating afterwards, but using the body's natural intelligence to teach itself something it never noticed before, or never organized before, or never perceived before. And you could do that with things you think you know, of course. I mean, if you actually teach yourself a plie, if you've been doing plies your whole life in different techniques, but if you actually think about, what do I really know about this? It's not really, for me, it's always been about dancing. It has never been about achieving technical skills, and it hasn't also been about correcting. All of those things are important, but other people were taking care of that. I could be free to ask my questions about dancing. I mean, other people are teachers of all kinds of, and the whole field of somatics, which changed the training of dancers in a fantastic revolution in my lifetime, didn't exist before. But the question really was about dancing, and what do I need to dance? What do I need? And if I'm always correct, if I'm interested in doing something physically correctly, if it's about avoiding injury, then it's essential. But usually you have to injure yourself first in order to look for a solution. When I went to Bali, I was curious how I would watch the villagers, working all day and carrying things on their heads. And then I would go with the troupe, and they would just, there's no such thing as warm up, there's no such thing as technique. They go from their daily life and immediately are in this incredibly rarefied, articulated, weird, very hard on the body posture and doing these fantastic things. And I thought, yes, now that is the way I feel. I can enter a room, and if I've come to dance, I just dance. If I come to warm up, I lose my desire to dance. It's just a mind state of dancing is a mind and then body emotional state. It's a state, and it doesn't require proper form. Well, this is anyway. For me, that was very important to bring into a discussion with dancers and teaching. How do we use ourselves? We're perfect. And so, to dance, anybody can dance. I mean, it's not everybody is a dancer, that's not the point, it's just that everybody can dance. They get repressed, okay, but still, we have everything we need, even if we don't have arms, it's a wonderful thing. And so, starting to look at these, what am I ready to do? And being able to have that dialogue of observing myself, observing my observation, always working with observation from all sides, and cultivating ways of doing that. So in the cultivating of strategies or ways of teaching myself things, they start to become a technique. I mean, you build your own technique, but I'm just flying through all of these key words. But observation, the performance of observation in relation to dance is very, very intricately wound up, also because dance is taken in through vision and music. But music is what I think we all go to see dances for. I mean, the music helps us just, entrains us to be able to watch something moving in front of us, or moves us, tells us how to feel. But without that, dance is very eloquent, even without the hierarchy of music organization. And there's a lot of dancing happening in the body. So the observation link is part of these tuning practices. It's how I look, of course, influences what I see, not just in terms of expectation. Of course, I always look with my expectation, and then I can't see if it doesn't feed me that. But yeah, I always can look with expectation. But there are micro ways of looking. There are many filters we use. Even, yeah, I mean, if I watched a dance concert, this is silly, but yeah, keeping the shade down, just letting in a little light, I would experience the dance in front of me in a very different way. Usually the audience is tuned by what they're looking at, of how to compose their attention, and but if they decided to shift that way of looking, slightly change their filter, they might have more enjoyment that they actually are part of the equation of looking. It's not just looking at, but it's kind of more entering into that they could choose to just watch people's feet. Forget about the whole rest of the ballet. Just watch the feet. I mean, there's ways in which we can extract from what we see or what's in front of us a new perception. So these are funny examples, to make that. But there are many, many different ways we tune our attention to actually to see. It's looking with the eyes is, I mean, it's an enormous lot of possibilities of how we actually use our posture and our eyes, even, just simply that, at what's in front of us. So all of these practices come in. And one other thing is making more explicit to me why the choices dancers are making. You can talk to a choreographer who crafts movement and space and time and light, and you can talk after about these things. But when people are trying to develop their own physical imagination in the field now, I think we value more now personal voice, maybe a little bit more, a personal voice in movement, not just coded gesture. Maybe we don't value it all that much, but I think we value it more. But it's more important because the dancer also needs to empower themselves. They need to make the decisions about what they will or will not do in the service of their art, and also their decisions. They have to feel like they make a difference. So if they decide to enter a space, you have to stand. You have to stand on the illusion that you have something to say. It's really all about artifice, crafting your body's speechability. And in the practices, each person is working on noticing the patterns of interest from an internal place, but also we're always producing something to look at, often with eyes closed, so that what rises as organization, or what you might call composition or design, what rises in front of us is not visually ordered. It's more intuitive. And so it arises in a much more organic rhythm, shape. It's not so studied. And so by looking at it, we know we're making the organization. If it's got if the performers have no visual, are not making choices that through the visual design, but it immediately puts you you remember what it's like to just be in nature, because the rhythms and the patterns are very organic. The way the tree moves, or the way the way the cars pass by. That's part of the nature of our cities, the rhythms of that, and so by provoking something to look at that has some qualities that would really be very difficult to choreograph, although Cunningham did it, I don't know how he did it. It had some of these incredible rhythms of the natural world, and I mean, he did compose by chance a lot. His dancers didn't, and then they learned it precisely, and that might be why using chance procedures with abstract movement also provoke a similar sense of of environment or action as just looking at the waves or the birds, and looking at the bigger picture, zooming out and seeing what your eyes catch. So you go deeper into your animal nature of how you make sense out of movement in time and space. A lot of tricks. Yeah, that was a key. I left that out. But that was a very key for me after I had been teaching learning, trying to teach myself how to learn by teaching that. I stopped dancing and I picked up a video camera. So video was a really profound shifting medium to a new medium for me. I had a chance to watch my learning process because with video you didn't need a teacher. It's a teaching tool, it's a self-teaching tool. And back then it was cheap. I had never used a camera. It's too expensive. Film, still camera or moving camera, but video puts a feedback tool in your hands. It was handheld. It's the earliest portable handheld. The functions were all manual. It sat on your eye, straight ahead, not with the viewfinder here. You were right behind the lens. So I was really bad at it, but I was so fascinated that I felt like I was making choices. I'm looking at stillness and movement, but the frame is as handheld, so it's moving a little. So this language of looking, it like just went in my body because it was all happening in here. And yeah, focus, getting close, going far away, approaching the natural world. Black and white, oh, fantastic. To be able to just look at form, and what an amazing tool. And you could play it right back. You could shoot anything, you could play it right back, see immediately what your choices had been. And yeah, for me, it was my body was making the choices. I really didn't have an eye. I didn't know what I was looking at, really. And so it was an extreme kind of gift. And then, so the feedback from that was very important. You could keep learning every time. You just pick it up again. Look at the same object, or look at the same event, and see all 1,000 ways you could frame it. You could add movement. You could subtract movement, by moving, letting. Okay, you could do a lot of simulating of stasis of things not move. Anyway, it was a fantastic experience, and I did explore that for a long time. One, a learning process, a self-teaching process. And also I did, when I got a little more control, I started realizing I made the same decisions about movement that I made as a dancer. I recognized that immediately. I organized based on a certain kind of dynamic musicality, or whatever. But it was very choreographic, my choices. And yeah, and just what I was interested in looking at. Yeah, that was the immediate in working with a camera. I needed to make events on both sides of the camera, because also I was teaching. To learn it, I also taught it. So I constructed these feedback games of scores for in front of the camera and same scores behind the camera, scores which would have something to do with, doesn't matter, movement, blah, blah, blah. And these are kind of tricks, but when the dancers were moving with their eyes closed again, you didn't know what was going to happen. So you're looking through the camera also, there was a suspense you had to detect. You had to use your anticipatory sense to detect what was going to happen and what was organizing. And it also made it very interesting for the dancers to look back at it, because we always reviewed everything. The playback was as important as shooting, but playback for the camera person to see what they chose. And everybody played all the roles. You just always in front and then behind the camera. But also with the eyes closed, we navigate through our other senses. The eyes are never working alone. It's just they're so hierarchical. First defense against the future. We just name everything that's good. Okay, I know I'm not going to go over there because... and there's the door. Okay, now I can feel comfortable and look around. So we use our eyes always, they're very important to do very quick, instant assessment. And without them, all the other senses are supporting. They all know also. Well, the ears, they know what's going on in here too. And they're just not as dominant. So once we start to navigate also our skin and how we feel proximity or are drawn in a certain direction without the vision, we're just very, very, we're much more skillful than we think. So closing the eyes, opening the eyes. Oh, many, yeah. At first we kind of go to sleep. I mean, it's a signal to the body that the eyes closed is a signal to the body to rest, and that's the way it is. But to be active, and rather than, you can really explore your inner world. Close your eyes, and it helps you go in. But I was also very concerned about action and being in the world. And because I lived so far away in the middle of nowhere, in the mountains, and you could get it. You're not meditative when you live on a farm in the mountains. You're not. I mean, you have lots more opportunities to just listen to the world, the world around you. But you're very busy sustaining your life. So, you do a lot through necessity when you live a little less, with a little less conveniences. You're busy with the necessities. And then when you come to the city, it's like you could buy everything. And everything is ordered for your, well, if you're privileged, you can buy everything. Sorry. It's all set out for you. All the solutions are there, and we don't use our wits so much. You can close your eyes to go in, it's fantastic. But I really needed, I've always, I grew up during I was a 60s kid. I was, part of the huge mobilization of all the young people to stop the war in Vietnam, civil rights. So there was a kind of mass activism going. I would say I also came from a family that was active, not so much in the front line, but yeah, that was in the tradition of my family. But I was never just focused on politics and activism in that way. I was much more into trying to make a life out of, away from the dominant culture, personally. But I also really feel like we need to be in our environment. We need to be present. And so most of the work that I do with dance and the eyes closed is really very active in the environment. And yeah, that's more and more important. I was thinking at the end of this week how different it is to offer this material I've been offering for a very long time now, and seen, big changes in the dance culture, in the world, in the dance culture, Western dance culture. And recently, with the rise of shit all over, with the climate, with gender, with racism, everything rising with shit. I'm noticing that the young people, it's beautiful to understand that here in Catalonia, the organization of the young people demonstrating. And in Hong Kong, there are many different reasons, but all over. But there's a kind of wisdom of the young people. Even we were afraid they were going to get with all their, but there's something that's fruiting out of this social media connection of being in a mass of people and communicating for other reasons besides just not knowing, being bored and not knowing what to do. And I see this with the younger people I meet in the workshops. They're much more ready to jump into these altered states, because it is a little bit, in my workshops, a little bit like taking drugs, psychedelics. We really mess around without the drugs, with our ways of organizing our perception, and it's quite fun, but you have to restabilize even after. But I noticed now there's much more interest in that and in listening to each other, in this the tools of calling, the tools of real-time editing as explicit calls to the space, and everybody is empowered to take the call or not. The point really isn't about not, because then you're not playing the game, but it's still, there still can be resistances to having somebody intervening in your flow. But there's always, as it's evolved, the person who takes the call, they take the call, but they measure how long they sustain the desire that's put out into the space. So that, it's been very interesting to me to see that people are more willing to take the call if they're empowered, to drop it, to stop it whenever they want, in a measure they choose, or to sustain it. It's the creation of a kind of listening for consequences, that actions have consequences. And when we get more absorbed in observing, it takes time for something to develop. like in the bath with the photograph. Put it in the chemical, and then it takes some time, and then you have to say, now, right? It comes, and then you say, oop, not a second too late. You have to say now, and it's the same with looking in the real world. It takes time to put your senses in somewhere before something organizes for you. So when many people are playing, we all have a slightly different sense of time, but we're interested in letting the consequences develop in the bodies. We can see that if we watch. It has consequences in the space and in the bodies. And then because we're always changing roles, there's a kind of, it becomes a kind of consensus tuning. You organize yourself differently when you know what it's like to be on the other side. It's very political like that, and then in the group, people start to reaffirm certain values of what's happened, and others get dropped, and you wonder why. So it's sort of creating, in a little space of time, a culture that has its own values. Not so much, because I felt like I was starting to fall into that, thinking about the construction of this feedback system and recycling of who's, There's no in or out in the observatory. I mean, when we invite an audience, it's another. You can do that in many different ways, but we did it in a more classical way. Of the audience was stuck in their chairs, observing from their point of view, and didn't move and didn't engage in. The most important thing for me is by watching and trying to puzzle out what are they doing, what happens when somebody says this, and then somebody trying to see what the consequences of these communications are. Sometimes recognizing it and sometimes being lost, that it starts to activate your own editing mind, makes you more aware of what you want. Oh, also with the small calls, with the pause and reverse and repeat, and with the operational calls, that the audience get activated, even if they can't, say it themselves, that they start to notice that is going on in their own, in their own attention, the desire, the rising of desire. But within the play itself, whether there are extra observers, we're all observers and we're all in it. But there are ways of composing our attention that make us feel the weight of attention is there. And we read this very clearly as humans. We know what each other's intention is. No, we don't know exactly what we're going to do, but we know when we're organized to move, and we know a lot about intention and where our attention is. And we know we're experts at this. We know when somebody's drifted away in the middle of our conversation. We see it in the eyes, very clear, when you kind of space out. Somebody's talking, and maybe you come back. But that's so natural. We can't keep it focused all. But so, in the enacting that observation, cycling of attention and space out, and the weight of attention. I can be in the space and be an observer without drawing attention. So we're constantly framing through our observing, we're reframing the action, or pointing to a new part of the space or the action itself. It's very political. I mean, it's just the politics of behaving like animals. I mean, our animal behavior. It's incredible kind of depiction of making choices about our interactions together, and whether we do something together. Like in dance, there could be lots of people, and you know, oh, well, what are they doing? They're not doing something together. And then suddenly you might feel like they're doing something together, even if it's not so direct. And then it can become direct. And that's like, wow. When you recognize there's actually a direct relationship. They're paying attention. So you're watching this incredible, I think it's very dynamic, but decisions being made constantly by the performers. And then you can replace when you get bored. I mean, if you lose your attention, you don't want to act anymore, and then there's a replace, and you just go and you notice someone, and you go and you replace them as much as you noticed. And there you're in a completely new perspective, both in the space and in your own body. And then, well, it's a concatenation of consequences from the very first thing that happens with a group. It's very fascinating to be inside, even when you're not really feeling that physical. You don't have to have any ideas. Somebody does. There's always somebody who's got some proposition they can't. And then you can inhibit that if you feel like, pause, reverse. If someone wants to enter and you're very absorbed in something and you don't, save it for later. But there's always this constant consequences of people's actions and their intentions, and you know, we can play very simple games. We did a very kind of complex thing the other night at Caldera. That was fine, but it can be very simple, really simple actions, really simple intentions, and you see how it starts to work, or that it takes you on and it makes theater. I mean, it certainly makes theater because that's the way we are. We project narrative. We make connections over time.